couple of homies went there before me. So I actually went to school and I was like, man, it looks like y'all having fun. And that was me. So I saw people partying on Tuesday. I was like, man, I'm gonna party on Tuesday. See people partying on Wednesday? I'm gonna party on Wednesday, right? I mean, I'm kicking it Tuesday through Sunday, right? And I'm calling back home like, man, this college is the joint. Ain't nobody waking you up. Man, you get to do your own thing. But I wasn't really on my business in terms of doing work in school. So I was also running track down there. So my coach called me into the office and he was like, look, man, it's not gonna work. You know, if they put you on probation, it's hard to get off probation. And then if you are on probation too long, they're not gonna keep you at the university. And before that, they did a thing, so you know how you get your midterm grades? Instead of giving you your midterm grades, they actually sent it to my house first, right? So I didn't know, I had no idea what I had in my first 8 weeks of college. I had no idea what the grades were. My mom calls me like 9 o'clock on a Sunday and she is she is snapping on me. And I'm saying to myself, what's happening? She's like, look at these grades, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying, what grades? Yeah, what are these? What grades? She's like, these grades here? I'm looking at them right in front of my face. I'm like, what does it say? So I had like, if I remember correctly, I think I had like a C, 3 Ds, and an F. First semester, right? So I was out there bad. But luckily I had this guy who was a tutor, and he showed me, he said, okay, look, here's some things that you can do right on to get you situated. So I worked with him for, let's see, that was so that was like October. So from October all the way to May of the next year. So that whole almost 10 months, I worked with him around getting stuff together and figuring out what to do in terms of getting on point with classes, because a lot of stuff I didn't know, but then a lot of stuff I didn't pay attention to. So he put me onto that. And then running track, we had to go to, because I had such a bad first semester, I had to go to what they called a study table. And study table was just kind of like high school study hall, but you had to bring your work. You had to show somebody that you were actually doing the work. And then if you got decent grades, the end of that semester, you wouldn't have to come back to study table. So I didn't really like study table, so I was trying to work as hard as I could to get out of there. But that was my first year of college. So I mean, I always tell folks that story, because it's this thing around getting to understand what college is about, in opposed to you're not supposed to be there. So that was my first year in school, in terms of, and I always think about the first year, because once I figured it out, it was better as the stuff moved on. Yeah. So I grew up right here on 87th Street, 87th and Kenwood. So my parents actually bought the house that I grew up in from my uncle. So I was there all the way. My parents sold the house to me in 2003. So I bought it from them, and then I ended up selling it in 2011. And yeah, so I still come back, you know, all my people still, a lot of my people, some have moved away, but a lot of people still live in the area. So still go back, and I don't live too far away, so I can still come back and see my folks. No, it was another person who was interested in the house. I was getting married, so we needed a little bigger place, because the house I grew up in is pretty small. So we were trying to get a bigger place. So that's how I ended up where I am now.
So how much do you know about the Woodlawn neighborhood?
Quite a bit, actually, in terms of, but I mean, I still need to learn more. Like, when I was growing up, Woodlawn had all these gravestones, so these older buildings that had that were stone, that were really long. So streets like University, Kimbark, parts of Kenwood, and then even now if you go on Minerva, like you can still see those older brownstones, like 66th and Minerva. It's those really whole row of those brownstones, really nice houses that last essentially forever if you take care of them. I know more about Woodlawn, Cottage Grove, and east to Stony Island, but not as much about West Woodlawn. So I've been working with some folks, and I think you might have even interviewed some of the folks from an organization called Blacks in Green, or they might have come by and talked to you all, but they're in West Woodlawn, so west of Cottage Grove. So I think that's the space that I need to learn more about. I'm much more familiar with Woodlawn, specifically 61st to 67th, Cottage Grove to Stony Island. That's the area I know the most. But again, it's a whole bunch that I can learn even about that area and West Woodlawn.
So, speaking of violence, like, would you say that our teens today are like being brainwashed by the music, or it's just not what they grow up on?
No, I think as you all as young folks, you all have to contend with a couple of different things. I think one of the things is you all have to deal with distractions, right? More distractions. So not just TV and media, but you got social media, you got all other things and all types of advertisements that are actually targeting you all as young folks. So I think before we start to talk about young people as violent, I think it's really important to talk about the conditions, right? And what is actually happening. And in those conditions, do we have sometimes violent responses, right? So do our conditions actually affect the way we see ourselves and see other people? Another thing is what does that kind of conflict look like? And then how can that conflict be heightened? And then with you all as young people, if you know about the ways that conflicts can be manufactured or created to you all's detriment, now can you say, all right, I see what they're doing here. Let me fall back, reflect on this a little bit, and then say, okay, there's something else. So can schools, so the question I'm always asking is, can schools provide that other reason, right? This other reason to kind of pay attention to your world, right? And I think when we look at it from those, when we reframe it in that way, it gets us away from talking about young people as naturally violent or prone to violence, because all that language is problematic when we're not paying attention to the conditions that actually impact what we see as happening, right? So there's like when we were talking earlier this summer, in terms of talking about all those things that bring people to responding in a certain way. I mean, way from locking up certain folks to splintering groups on certain blocks. So now you don't have certain structures that used to be in place. Now it's a block-to-block situation, heavily intense, conflict brewing. You close schools, send people from one school to another place that really don't have any knowledge of each other. Conflict. Close house, will actually destroy housing, and then send people who came from those sets of buildings that were actually torn down, bring them into another neighborhood, don't know each other, conflict. So if you look at all those things, I think it actually allows us to think about it differently. A good friend of mine, Chandra Gill, always says, we have to think about individual responsibility and institutional accountability, right? So what are we doing ourselves? And then are there institutions that benefit from us being in conflict, right? So if a neighborhood is deemed violent, for example, then does it allow for law enforcement to swoop down, start locking folks up? Now there's nobody in those particular houses for some time. People buy those houses because now there hasn't been payments or rents made, and now you get a whole different group of people in there, right? So now thinking about that in a different way. So I think that's really important to kind of reframe when we talk about young folks and violence. Yes. Yeah, and I think the program that you all are in is a way to actually see what's actually happening. And I think it's a way to instill hope, because now you see the possibilities, right? So if young people, I always think, if young people can see the possibilities of what can happen, then they're much more prone to engage in and do it, right? More so than adults, right? So I always think about that. You all as young people holding the keys to that, right? To really being, so if you all are hopeful and see yourselves as valuable and see others as valuable and working together around how you understand each other and the work that you all are trying to do, I think it can be a very hopeful situation. But again, it's also real work, right? And I think that's really important to put that work aspect in it, because that's something that